Welcome to the Smith Publicity webinar series, covering a range of book publicity and marketing topics for authors and publishers alike.
Well, I know we're all here for the same reason, and that's an opportunity to learn from our guests today and just from our general discussion that we'll have around the very hot topic of getting on the same page with literary agents. As I mentioned to our guest speakers before we got started, I've been around for about 17 years in the industry and have long thought of the agent as the unicorn. I think back, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was a lot harder to understand that world. What I've seen in recent years is just more transparency. And with that said, I think we have two wonderful guests on here to give us an even further look behind the curtains. Joining us today is Donya Dickerson, who's spent over 2 decades of helping authors get published. She's currently a literary agent at Aevitas Creative Management, where she focuses on nonfiction titles. Prior to Aevitas, she was the associate publisher for the business trade list at McGraw-Hill, where she had a track record of publishing multiple New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestsellers. We also have John Willig, who graduated from Brown University and had his first job as a sales representative in academic publishing. He soon began work as a marketing manager and then an editor for HarperCollins, where he published in 1984 one of the first books on AI. That was my favorite piece of your bio, John. You're so ahead of the times.
Thank you. And it was an homage to George Orwell, too, at the time in 1980.
Sure. As his interest moved to trade publishing, he became the executive editor at Prentice Hall for business books. While at P. Hall, John enjoyed working with such authors as Henry Mintzberg, Philip Kotler, and Jim Collins. He acquired and edited Jim's first book, Beyond Entrepreneurship, which has now a new edition, BE 2.0. In 1991, he decided to become a literary agent to work more closely with authors. And throughout his career as an editor and agent, John has successfully negotiated over 800 publishing agreements. He participates at many industry events, including the Writer's Digest and American Society of Journalists and Authors and conferences. We'll have contact information to share at the end of our webinar, and we'll encourage you to get in touch directly. My name is Corinne Moulder, not Marissa Eigenbrud, who is our president, and as my name says on Zoom, I am the vice president of business development. I've been here, as I mentioned, for about 17 years this summer and have worked into the business development path, where I am a lot of times working with authors on the front end of developing their marketing plan for the rollout of their book. So it is our contacts like John and Donya who are so coveted and so important to the work that we do. So we're going to dive right in. I think there's a lot of demystifying what an agent does, what the benefits are. So we're going to take it pretty basic here and start out. John and Donya, please explain first what a literary agent does and what your day-to-day work entails.
Donya, do you want me to start?
Why don't you start and then I'll add on.
Okay, before I get in, just quickly, just thank you so much for the kind, introduction. And it's always great to get together, with Donya. She's been such a great editor, and I think of her too as a fellow truth teller, in this business. And I'll add too that our mayor in New York, Mayor Adams, is very fond of saying that there's 8 million New Yorkers and 8 million points of view in New York about things. And there are days in this publishing business, when it seems as if there are, if not a million, thousands of points of view, about the business and, what's selling and how to sell it effectively and all of that. So kudos to you, Corinne, and Marissa and Smith, for having these webinars and helping writers, get a little better informed about the process and who we are, and kind of opening the doors a little bit, into the industry, because there's just so much, information out there, and a lot of misinformation, too. So So thank you, and to the group at Smith Publicity.
Thanks.
As far as the agents, we wear many hats, and traditionally and historically, it goes back to when actually the 1800s, when business used to be just a handshake between an author and the printer, and then it evolved over many decades. And with that, with contracts and and the whole legal aspects of the business. So a lot of agencies have their foundation and the basis in the legal world, because it was based on contracts. And then, of course, we have the whole aspect of selling and deals and negotiating, and that becomes a big part of it. Now, that was all well and good, until when the author was just writing the manuscript, and there's the manuscript goes to the publisher, and the publisher is going to be doing all the editing and the production and the marketing and all of that. And that has changed, dramatically over the past, couple of decades, where now, authors are very much, part of that whole process, and the process of marketing, and going to get involved in all the different aspects, of publishing. So the agent now has become much more of a trusted advisor, throughout, that whole process. My inbox and the inboxes of many great agents, in the industry, and Donya's soon will be filled with, questions about, cover designs, and questions, about publicity, and questions about schedules, and all of that. So we've become, in many ways, we've really gone beyond just the nature of contracts and getting, the best deal, which is still obviously very important, to authors. And the best deal oftentimes involves, who's the best publisher, and who's the best editor, for your work. So that's where our relationship with publishers comes into play, and with the editors, and that's built up over time, and who they trust, too. So lots of hats day to day. It makes for an interesting day.
Donya, anything to weigh in on that from a day-to-day perspective, or things that you're really taking in at Aevitas?
Sure, yeah. And I'll kind of add on to what John said too. I mean, I think one of the things that, especially from my experience on more of an editorial side of things before becoming an agent, that I think is so beneficial about having an agent is that, an agent understands the business. So they can really kind of work with both sides, both, with the authors they represent, as well as the publisher, as kind of a go-between to really kind of help understand, is the publisher not doing what they should be doing, in which case they can come in and really advocate. Is the publisher asking for something of the author? Well, they might be able to explain to the author, like, what they're asking is actually really helpful. It's very much, this is a relationship business. You want an agent that you have a relationship that you feel good about. You want to work with a publisher and an editor, that you feel good about that relationship. But sometimes there's conflict, and that can be really hard in relationships. So having an agent is someone, who can kind of come in and deal with the conflict for you, so that you don't have to, make the relationship tense between you and your editor. And then on the flip side, the editor might have some feedback that, an author isn't responding well to, and an agent can kind of help, work with the author to understand, what's actually going to be better for their career in the long run. And I think that's another benefit of an agent, is that they're thinking big picture, your career, hopefully multiple books, if that's something that you want to do. I think in terms of the day-to-day, I mean, I will say, I always said as an editor, there's never really a typical day, so it's hard to answer that
We
question.
can relate.
But I mean, I think it's, certainly reviewing proposals, trying to sort of keep an eye on, the marketplace and see what's selling, and, building, the relationships with the editors that, hopefully we can pitch lots of books to. And so just trying to find authors too. I mean, a big part of what we do is very entrepreneurial in terms of, looking for people that, might have a great idea, a great platform, and reaching out to them. So it's just kind of balancing all that, plus editing proposals and writing pitch letters and many, many other things, right, John?
That's for sure. Right? You've mentioned, Donya, I think a key point, and this is for folks who are either going the agent route or even the self-publishing route, and which has become popular over the years, is that I think folks underestimate all the points of contact when for a book in terms of once it is in with a publishing house, or if you are going to self-publish, all of the eyes and all of the hands that are involved with the production of a book, and with that there's lots, as Donya mentioned, lots of challenges, and we've had quite a bit over the last couple of years with scheduling and production and printing schedules, and coordinating all of that with the marketing and promotion and publicity and pre-ordering. So it's something that an agent who has been in the business a while, has a lot of experience, can add value, not just for the author, but is adding value for the publisher in terms of their counsel and advice. So I think that's a big part of the daily work too.
I think so too, and I can safely say it spills into the publicity process as well. To your point of seeing the agent turn into author advocate and have this blend in bringing all the relationships together, we've seen the uptick in responsive agents that want to join publicity calls with us, and really are so protective of who their authors are going to hire, how their budget looks, and it's a different layer for us to work through. But to your point, Donya, this is a relationship business, and it really is allowing us to expand into these new areas and just continue to learn more about the industry. But we've definitely seen that Papa Mama Bear protective nature on the authors that we're working with, and we in fact welcome it, because it's just more team strength, it's more enthusiasm around the project. And again, if there are those tense relationships or little blips that we have to work through, we know we have another resource there to kind of go to bat and support our client together. That was really helpful. Well, I don't think we need to get into the benefits of the professional relationship. We really did hit that on the first one. But let's talk about querying, because we hear querying. What is it? What is querying, first of all? And what are some tips that the both of you would offer for authors who are just starting the process?
Or do you want me to start this time, John, or you want to go
Yeah,
ahead?
I'll just start off, quickly. I think, I always try to have my clients to, think, and potential, clients, to be thinking, of publishers as investors, and what you are, seeking, with a query to an agent, or if you're going the traditional route, is essentially what you are seeking is funding for your project. And the publisher and the editor have lots of choices of the tremendous volume in the marketplace today. So you're querying this agent that in a way, I won't say a gatekeeper, but again has these relationships with publishers, and they trusting that agent's judgment about talent, and the character, of that author, that they will ultimately make that investment, in a new project. So the queries, are coming to agents. That's one of the protocols, if you will, of the industry. And how you query is very important. And ultimately, it's what we're going to be doing, to agents, to editors, pardon me, also. So you want to, and this is where I think a little bit of homework, can reap some better results and big results, for authors, where you're looking and trying to find my interest, or if whether it's the topic areas I've worked in, the authors I've worked with, and trying to connect, with that agent. There's a number of directories. Donya, for years, was involved with the Writer's Digest Guide to literary agents that profiles agents and agencies, where you get a sense of what they're most interested in. Well, folks can see I would recommend the Writer's Digest magazine. They have an annual agent, roundup, and that's very helpful. They're always profiling, agents. So when you start your query off by, with a little bit of acknowledgement that, you've done this homework, you have actually done something that 90 to 95% of the folks who send us queries are not doing. And when you make that connection, that agent is much more likely to read into your query. Another tip, for folks, besides, the actual directories, is that every aspiring author should have the top 5 to 10 books in their category.
Mm-hmm.
And if they go into those books, they will see, an acknowledgement section. And in that acknowledgement section, if the author, has been just a little gracious, with that, they will note, not just the editor and how thankful they are, for the editor, but if we're for it, they'll say, well, Donya Dickerson has been great, throughout the process. Well, there you go. You know that Donya, in terms of your, field, if you're in the health and wellness, category, I'm sure you'll see Marilyn Allen's name, popping up, or in business category, Leah Spiral, Jeff Herman, and these are great editors who authors acknowledge in their books. So you just have to go to your bookshelf and get the names, of the agents and agencies that are working in your zone, if you will. And then when you query them, you can start off by saying, I noticed that you worked with, XYZ author on such and such a book, or you can add even a little bit of honey to the letter, to the query, and say that, you admired that book. And agents are, and editors are as human as anyone else. And when you do that, we're more likely to get into your query.
Love that. Donya, anything to add there? Because I know that was a good start.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. I mean, definitely, if you really seriously want to be published, it's worth taking the time to do that kind of research and learning, what kind of books different agents represent. I only do nonfiction, and I get so many queries for fiction, and it's just kind of an instant reject. And it's clear that those people have just sort of been blanketing all the agents that, they have contact information for. So, to really kind of target, like, I know you do these kinds of books, and, these are some of your success stories. And I feel like my book, isn't in line with those categories. I think that that's very helpful. The other advice I would give is, it is a professional letter. I'm always kind of surprised at, the sort of quick, short, letters that don't really explain what the book is about or who the author is. I mean, the query letter really should, give a good understanding in a very short amount of space. I understand that's challenging, but and give a good understanding of, what the book is, who the audience is, and why you're the person to write the book. If you've got, a platform, any kind of highlights of that you can put in the letter. I mean, that's going to get so much more attention than, just a couple quick, sentences about what the book is that aren't clear and don't really explain, the unique selling point of the book. I think that's something that is really important. And it should be well written. This is somebody's going to have to sell your writing, so they want to know that you can take the time to like carefully write a letter.
I feel some things could be unspoken, but honestly, we need to hear that. People need to hear that, right? To really put that polish on it and put your best foot forward. I wanted to tip into some red and green flags that you all see in the queries. I think we're already hitting on that, but there were a couple things that we talked about in our meeting before the webinar. Donya, I think you had said this in querying agents. It's no longer a book versus book world. It's book versus limitless content. So in terms of what the queries would look like, you talked about, I think you and John both discussed brevity and not getting too long and not getting stuck in the weeds. So could you elaborate a little bit on the stats and the specifics and all of bringing in those key points that I believe we were kind of talking about? Feels a little too early to be bringing into the query that you sometimes are seeing.
Sure. And, I'm trying to remember exactly what we talked about on the call, but I think what, we talked about was, certainly when, an agent and then eventually editors look at a book project, they're kind of weighing two things equally. So they need a really great book idea and something that's, fresh and, we know is marketable in terms of book idea, but equally, and I can't stress that it's equal, they need a great author who, has a platform, is willing to participate in the marketing of the book. I think a lot of people, don't always understand that, the editor is really kind of evaluating both the author and the idea at the same time. So it can get a little confusing, I think, for authors, though, in terms of, what then makes my platform impressive and stand out. And, what we were talking about the other day is, it's really having the ability to get where your audience is, and having, the ability to sort of talk with them directly. And I do want to just sort of preface this by saying I'm more in the nonfiction world. I think this is a little bit different in the fiction world. So, we can, John, maybe you can talk to that because that's not my area of expertise at all. But for nonfiction, it's, if your audience is on LinkedIn, then really having a strong platform on LinkedIn. If, it's more on Instagram or, TikTok, it's, having those kind of followers. Or, it might not even be social media at all. And I think, a lot of publishers get a bit overly focused on social media, but sometimes it's someone who's speaking to tens of thousands of people a year, and that's how they're in front of their audience. Or it's a combination of speaking and podcasts and something else. And I think for the purpose of the query letter, you want to really kind of highlight that, where your audience is and how you're already connecting with them. And then, of course, if you get an agent's attention, when the proposal, then that's when you can really go deep into, all the ways that you're currently connecting with your audience. And I will add, from the publishing point of view, publishers love numbers. So anything you can quantify in terms of the numbers of people you reach, the number of speaking engagements, the number of people who have your newsletter, the publishers really find those numbers helpful, because then when they go to sell the book into Barnes and Noble or other places, those numbers end up having a big impact on the number of books that they initially take of your book.
Those are just such great points, Donya. And what I try to get again, folks to realize, and most writers and aspiring authors out there, they're ultimately thinking of, how, they're readers. they're dreaming of walking into Barnes and Noble and seeing their book on the table and the shelf, and that's the dream, and you're hoping for that. As an agent, we're totally focused on your first reader and your first buyer, and that person is going to be very different from that walking into the bookstore. So the editor is receiving every magazine, journal in their field, every e-newsletter, all the competing books. The office is flooded, with all of this information. So, our challenge is, how do you cut through, all of that, and how do you connect, with that editor? And the drill I sort of put my authors, through is saying, look, uh, put aside, all the demographics, put aside, all the competing books and what you think about them, and put aside all the hyperbole that you're going to be the next, best-selling, book. Just tell me in 2 or 3 paragraphs what your unique value, is, and what you're creating is going to then have someone say, I'm going to spend 25, $30, on this book. So that really, in terms of, it's true in nonfiction, but I think it also applies, into the fiction world. What is it about, your story that's going to make it stand out? And how are you going to try to connect with that editor? And in the fiction world, they're very fond of what's referred to as comps. And the comps are sort of like related books, that give the editor a sense of where you're fitting into, the marketplace. And the world of fiction has many categories, subcategories that editors are assigned to and interested in. So you have to be even more, I think, laser focused, in terms of where you're, fitting into that editor's, range, of interest. So on the non-fit, and then as Donya, pointed out so well, is that once that editor's mind is engaged, in the idea, then they're immediately thinking about their group and their team and their publicity people and the marketing people, and how are they going to sell them. So I typically try to move that up front, in proposals, to give that editor, a sense that, the author has the chops, if you will, in terms of, the number of followers and, the speeches and social media platform and all of that. So I think if you achieve that, then you're motivating that editor then to spend time on your proposal. And their time, is just so limited given how much they receive. So the whole sense of, the query and the pitch to them is to be, at least from my point of view, be very informational right up front, very much driven by what's unique about, your book, in the marketplace. And since I'm an old New Yorker, I can say this: no bullshit, in the query.
Yeah.
And then we gotta, then I think we have a good shot at working together.
Yeah. John, you said something there, and I'm so happy you said it again, which was that the agent's focus is on your first buyer. So that's really a lesson for the rest of the marketing of the book, the launch of PR, because even, as we get down the line, that's where everyone's going to start, is where the author is well known, where they're going to make those connections, where their name has impact, their work brings value. And so in the spirit of the teams that are brought together through the launch of the book, that's another way that, you're already setting the stage, really, to knock those dominoes down later. I mean, that's a conversation we have a lot at Smith. Certainly we want to go big and we want to go mainstream, but we're going to start with your core.
Absolutely. You know, the great late Sonny Mehta, who was the editor-in-chief at Knopf, had a great quote about the business. And sure, like every business has its everyday challenges and all of that. But he would say, like, at the end of the day, I think I still have the greatest job in the world, because I can open up my email or someone sends me something and I look at it and I say, wow, I never thought of it that way. What a different way of approach, to it. Or this research is really highlighting in a way that I never thought of, before. Or wow, this is a story about someone I had no idea, about. Or and it's getting to that point, that positive kind of connection and energy, with an editor that carries in through. And Donya has done this so well through her career, and she's taught many editors about this is that it's that energy that flows through the company, then that editor has about, a book, and that then excites the people in marketing and publicity, and ultimately, readers themselves.
Yeah. Oh, that's so helpful. Well, John, you mentioned proposal. So I think if we could dive, the book proposal, if we could dive in there just a little bit in terms of, you have your agent. What are just the high level key points that you're stressing when you're developing that proposal in tandem with your author? And what are you really elevating? So you mentioned, of course, the core buyer, your first buyer, you're elevating that. Donya, you're elevating what makes it unique and creative and different. What are some of the other areas in a book proposal that maybe authors are more surprised that they need to have figured out at that time, or any other high level points that you feel are educational here for our group today?
Well, I think, as we mentioned, there are books on, preparing, book proposals, and we could spend a whole session, on that. And Donya, of course, has such great experience, with that too, receiving, so many. But to my earlier point, one of the techniques that I've been using, and it's not rocket science, it's something from other professions, is really having an executive summary as the cover page, and really moving that to the forefront about, again, about the book, 2 or 3 paragraphs, and then 4 or 5 bullet points, up there about publicity, your credentials, motivating that editor to get into the rest, of the proposals. And I've even, used, I've had photos, on that cover sheet, if it's a history book, to kind of bring the project to life a little bit, a little bit more, and a graphic. So and that summary then leads the editor into the rest of the proposal. And those contents, have been pretty standard about, as far as the overview, the concept, for the book, and then getting into the author's, bio, and the plans, for promotion. One of the things that I'll be curious how Donya feels about this, that I've always felt, is that uh, oftentimes the special features and benefits of a book, the real practical features that when you go on the back page, and you see them listed, or in the jacket cover copy, of a book, oftentimes, authors they don't have them listed all too well, or it's buried in the overview, in the concept. So I actually have a section on special features and benefits. And we list those, for the editor, to say, hey, here they are. Here's your jacket copy. Here's your catalog copy, for the book. And to our earlier point, you better, if you're going to be self-publishing, you better be thinking about this too. And lifting that out, and don't assume that their readers are going to, just open up your book and find those. You got to tell them, what those features and benefits, are. So those are just a few items. I'm sure Donya has other points.
Love that twist, John. Thank you.
Yeah, no, John, I think that that's so great. And having received many proposals from you over the years when I was an editor, like, I mean, it's very helpful. You mentioned a little while ago that editors are really busy. And, once we have a proposal that we get excited about, we still have to do a lot of work to sell it internally. So having all that, kind of distilled makes it very easy for any kind of internal process that an editor has to sell the book. And then, like you said, later on, the copy person can use that to sell the book. I think it's really a good exercise for authors to be able to articulate those kind of things, and really kind of have the elevator pitch for their book ready, so that, if they have 2 minutes to talk about the book with someone, they can really articulate, what makes their book so special. When I think about a proposal, one of the things that I find is, important to think about is, something that it's subtle, but it's something that I think really can make the difference between a proposal that stands out from the others, is that you really have to sell yourself. Just really, it's not so much describing the book, but selling the book and selling you and your platform. And even in the competitive section, how do you sell yourself along with these other books? I think that that's something that people don't quite understand, that they need to kind of go that extra mile to make it clear that, this is a product, and that they're selling. Another section of the proposal that I don't think people talk about that much, but which is really important, is the competitive analysis section. And that's a place where I do see a lot of authors kind of, make some mistakes, that they maybe don't quite understand how that section is used. A lot of times I get books saying like this, or proposals that say, this is the only book on this topic. It's actually kind of a red flag for publishers. If it's the only book, it could be because of the, people don't want to buy a book on this topic. So, it might be like it's a fresh new approach to this category, or it's new research, or, it's this and this together for the first time. That's different from, no other book has been published on this category. And then I think the other thing that I've seen over the years that a lot of people do, that that I don't think always works to their advantage, is they list books that are competitive, and then they kind of put those books down. They write a lot about what's wrong with those books, where really a publisher is using that section to understand, what the marketplace is, and that, if people are buying books on this topic, they're going to want to buy this book as well. So it's great to sort of, highlight what's successful about that book and how your book is similar. And then you can say, and then on top of that, my book does X, Y, and Z, to differentiate it from that part of, the proposal. So, I would really kind of focus on books that have been successful. And at the same time, be realistic. A lot of people put, Atomic Habits, or the big sort of best-selling books that, it's hard to kind of replicate that. So find books that, the person has a platform that's similar to you, and it's the same audience that's reading, that would read your book, has read those books as well.
Oh, those are such good, unique
I-
nuggets. Thank you for sharing that, both of you.
That's such a great point, Donya,
Yeah.
because I'll often say to, to folks, is that, you have to keep in mind that, the project that you're pitching, and that those competitive books have been published by the editors that you're, that you're
Yeah.
pitching.
So
So
that's a good point. Yeah.
you don't go out and, again, to my early point, a little bit of honey can, can help, but
Yeah.
differentiate yourself. I'll just add, quickly here, again, my perspective, and I think it, in terms of how the industry, has changed, and is that, when we're thinking even in terms of quote unquote book proposal, the book is really just one format today, that, it's a hardbound or paper-bound, book. But that content in the book now is being, exploited in other formats, be it, the audio, format, or be it, obviously, ebooks, or, or digital, or if folks have done business or they have clients globally, now in terms of foreign rights and translation. So again, you're looking at trying to enhance the appeal to that investor, publisher, that your project is going to be generating, all of this, potential revenue and revenue sources. In the world of history and science, it could be, hey, this topic could be a great documentary, topic in terms of, movie rights, science documentary, also. So, publishers are really looking at it, now in terms of, okay, it's, yes, we do have, the book, but we have this content, in the book. And how are we licensing this content to generate, more revenues? So whatever you can put into the proposal that kind of highlights that, for an editor, you'll be separating yourself a little bit from the pack.
Thank you, John, for adding that. And that was another point that you brought into our pre-meeting as well, is that it is about the ROI and the selling, and seeing how that developed platform can take it even further, because we know the landscape is really shifting here. So we do have some questions in the chat we could jump over to, but I thought maybe one more question we could answer before we do so is just any tips for authors in the best ways to work with their agent. That could be on communication, on timing, on follow-ups, because I'm sure you get to that stage, you're excited for the next step. So just basic, everyday tips that you would share with your audience here.
Well, Donya, I'll just start, quickly by saying that even if you sent me the perfect query letter and the perfect proposal, I can guarantee you that I will find something there to question you about. And I want to get a sense of how open you are to, suggestions. I want to get a sense of how collaborative, you are. If you're going to be strident about, your title and your subtitle, then we have some issues, there. I'm kind of judging that, right from the get-go. I'm also judging that, again, in terms of our working relationship, with the author, an agent. But I'm also reminded, at many conferences I've had, one of my buddy, Matt Holt, who's a great publisher and, an editor at Ben Bella, when asked what advice he would give, for authors, Matt will always, the first thing he will say is, be nice. Be nice about it. Be kind. And, again, you'll separate, yourself. Yes, we're in a tough business, but, how you treat other people, because again, going back to my earlier point, within the publishing company, you're going to be interacting, with a lot of people. You build your reputation as an author through those relationships with folks who are not just your editor, but the folks who are working in production, in marketing and publicity. And that's how you get your reputation. And that's how you get a good reputation, that they feel good about working with you and promoting, your book, or investing in your book even more. It's a whole nother, conversation, but I refer to it as kind of the inside game, in the publishing world. And so I know how important that is. So I want to get a sense of that early on from my potential clients, how they will be when it comes to those working relationships with editors and folks within the publishing company.
That is just really fabulous advice. Because, I think one of the things that's hard about publishing is that, you've written a book and it feels so personal. So sometimes, you can feel a little defensive about it, or, people have suggestions. And, I think to sort of add to what you said, John, because it's such good advice, is that, just having an open mind to any kind of feedback, because these are people who do this professionally. So, if they're saying this, it's because they're trying to help you sell more books. So, just kind of really being open to, anything that they have to say, while it still feels authentic to you. I mean, certainly you don't want to change something and make it no longer authentic to you. I would add to that question, you said communicate as the first word. And I think at the end of the day, communication is so important. So if there's something that, it is frustrating you or you feel stuck with, I think the agent is the person that, you can go and talk with about it. I mean, even something like, you're going to be late on your manuscript due date. I mean, that's not something to to not communicate. And you'd be surprised the number of times as an editor where, 2 weeks before a book is due, I had someone say like, yeah, that's not going to happen. Like, well, you should have communicated that to me months ago when you knew you weren't writing the books. So, I think it's a time to be transparent and honest. And, just when there's a problem, the agent, as well as all the other people on your team, can really help you if you're willing to communicate, what the issues are.
So flexibility.
I'll often say to my
Oh, sorry, John, go
no,
ahead.
I was just going to say, I often say to my, my clients that, remember, life happens to all of us.
Yeah.
So things happen. And, it's best to, come out and say, okay, this is what the issue, is. And then, you work through that, and that's where, Donya's point about communication is just so important. The communication and being responsive, to the editors and to all the folks who are working within the publishing company. That's where we build our relationships with, with as an agent, with editors, and publishers, because if we're doing our job, well, we're vetting people, not just in terms of content, but in terms of their character, in terms of their working habits, and what's it going to be like, working with them.
That's so helpful. I love all of this advice, and communication will take you far regardless of where you are in the process, post-publication as well, as you're still working on getting your book out there. So let's turn to some of the questions that we have here. I thought this was a good one. Is it ever too early to reach out when you're maybe interested in a query letter and then find out they don't even have the right assets, or they're not quite ready for that next step?
Yeah, I think that people sort of get this idea that they want to write a book, but they haven't really, done their due diligence and sort of seen what other books are out there, how they're different from, their other books, or really sort of spent the time thinking through their ideas. I mean, I think it's really kind of important to understand, what is my book about? What am I bringing, to the conversation that's new and interesting, and being able to articulate that, and I think this sort of reaching out and saying, I write about a book about this topic, without really kind of knowing what you want to write, that's definitely too early. I'm also surprised by the number of people that query me that it actually sounds interesting and then they don't have a proposal ready. I mean, you want to sort of strike while the iron's hot, so I would definitely write that proposal so it's ready in case you have any kind of interest.
That's
John,
great.
what would you add to that?
Well, I would say that there are groups now, as the proposal, companies doing proposal crafting and, and helping authors. There's companies like Smith Publicity that are helping authors building their platforms, be it, social media, which is very, very important. And it's, there are now, I've counseled, folks that, perhaps, certainly maybe self-publishing is the better route, for them. There's 2 million, self-published, books a year. The quality of them has certainly improved, But at the same time, to Donya's point, oftentimes, I'll receive a self-published book and I'll say, well, geez, there's no recognition in terms of what other books, are in the field or in that category and the topics they're covering. It's as if someone had just, said, well, and this is where culturally we can get into the whole cultural thing where it's, you can do it, you can be an author and just do it. Well, maybe you should take a step back a little bit before you venture into that and the expense of it. If you're going to be self-publishing, self-funding, the project, take a step back, get into the bookstore, and you can't do this exercise, on Amazon. I'm sorry. Get into the bookstore, get into your category, and see those books, there right firsthand. Pull them off the shelves and say, okay, this is what I'm doing that's going to Donya's earlier point, differentiate, my book, from the others. Here's the value that I'm creating, in this marketplace that is unique.
Love that.
And I'll joke with them. I'll say it's not unlike, I'm very fond of hot sauces and barbecue sauces, having started my career in Texas. So, 30 years ago, there weren't too many hot sauces in the grocery store, right? But you go into the grocery store, today, and you'll see how many all of these hot sauces, right? Well, if you're going to come out with a new hot sauce, you better distinguish yourself in terms of that, because the store isn't going to carry your sauce, there, unless it's really stands out and you can really advertise how yours is different. It's not that far of a leap of the imagination to go from that store to Barnes and Noble or to Books A Million and look at seeing of yourself, in that category and saying, how are you going to stand out?
I love that metaphor so much, John. I'm going to
love
borrow
it.
that.
The
The hot sauce metaphor.
Well, my oldest son was here for the holidays too, and he was like, one of the first things he asked when he opened the refrigerator, he said, "What hot sauces do we have?" For the barbecue.
You heard it here first. They're not going to carry your sauce. Let's coin that one. We did see one question in here. Does Smith work with agents directly, or can you hire Smith first? And there is, because of the elongated process of building a brand, we are starting to work with some authors ahead of them querying or just starting to think through their target audience in terms of putting some of those assets and ideas in place that would start to feed into the query, into the eventual book proposal. So please don't hesitate to reach out. It's never too early to reach out for marketing and publicity. It is kind of a discovery of content and all that you're sitting on that we could kind of help you work through and make a little more sense of. I thought one more question. Go ahead, John, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that's great advice, because you have, just so much experience in terms of, again, the different topic zones and what could potentially work in one medium versus another, or what an aspiring author should be thinking about, based on, the topic that they're writing about and the category. And it's not all the same depending on, again, the category.
No, it never is. And I thought this was an interesting question. And I imagine with the digital proof and the power of our social media platforms, do agents ever proactively reach out to potential authors? Is that a bigger trend? Is there any change in how that's happening today?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think that, that to me is kind of a very fun part of this job is, finding someone who's doing something really interesting and has, breakthrough research or a big following, and just reaching out to them and, seeing if they want to talk about a book. I think that, and what's exciting about that is, an author might be querying several agents, hopefully I'm the only person reaching out to this person, although sometimes that's not the case, but.
I think that's an excellent point, because part of the advice I've given, again, to aspiring authors over the years, is that when you're thinking strategically, about this business, sometimes to get published, it's good to be published in another format, be in an article. So does your work fit into an article that can be published in Success Magazine? The article, obviously, whether it's Atlantic or Wired, or New York City, Sunday New York Times, you can go on and on. But those articles, and there are many very, very successful book authors, today, who started with the article, and the book really grew from the article.
Yeah.
So think about, how can your work become an article, in a magazine, get the hits that then you can be put on, on your social media, feeds, and that way you're building, and it's also a way of validation. That article validates your proof of concept, on what you're writing about, and that's reassuring, to an editor. So yes, in terms of agents looking at at articles, and looking at newspaper and,
Yeah.
the
Podcast, yeah.
magazines. I'm
Yeah.
looking at course catalog. I mean, that and editor and good editors are on the hunt, too. They don't have to necessarily totally be relying on on agents, for again, their next project. They can be doing the same thing with all that they're receiving, in their field, and then reaching out, to those authors. So I think the article, getting published via, articles, and, whether it's, and then showing your writing chops through Reddit and all of that, very, very important today.
That's a
I would
great
add
addition.
on to that, those, especially social media now, it's really kind of, I think, changed in terms of understanding what your audience wants. So, if you're posting stuff, you're seeing what people are reacting to, you can see where the questions are and their pain points. I mean, that it's cool. Your audience is telling you like what they want to hear from you, and being able to then go to an agent or an editor saying, I wrote this piece and I got, over X number of like downloads or comments, and it really shows that you are getting engagement around this idea.
That's so helpful. And I love the article and the early placement as a starting point for proof, and an opportunity to expand. And that is another area that we are seeing that strength and that positivity. It's really building that early framework, beta testing a little bit in the audience, in the outer media space, and then really narrowing down. Well, John and Donya, we are coming to an end here. I do want to turn it over to both of you to plug how to get in touch, or anything else that you're working on that you're excited about, before we wrap up. But I do want to say thank you for spending an hour here with us and with the group that we had today.
Well, I want to say thank you too. This was really amazing. And I know John said this, but I just want to, reiterate, like, these different webinars that you're doing are so helpful. And it's, I think that the world of publishing is so confusing to outsiders. So just really helping authors navigate that world and understand, who your team is, whether it's an agent or a publicist, or the editor at the publisher, so very grateful for you for inviting me to be a part of this, because it's really wonderful. In terms of getting in touch with me, I think somebody put my LinkedIn page in the chat. There's also the Aevitas website. And so if anyone wants to query me, there's a link on my page of the Aevitas website that you can just send a query in. It's through Query Tracker. It makes it a lot easier for people to submit queries. So that's the best way to do it.
Thank you, Donya.
Wonderful. Well, I'll echo what Donya has just said. It's always always a great pleasure to get together, with Donya and folks to talk about the business, because again, there's just so much misinformation out there. So leaning into folks who been in the trenches, if you will, for years. But at the end of the day, we're all still making these kind of educated bets, on projects. I'll be the first one to admit that if the guys from Freakonomics had showed up at my door, I probably would have said, "What are you guys talking about? I have no idea. This is not, for me." But that's my little bias about those kind of words. So, but helping aspiring authors and writers, the little bit of this information, about still the protocols of the industry, can be very helpful and yield, I think, really better results, with their efforts. So thank you, and to the folks at Smith Publicity, for having the webinar.
Excellent. Well, we'll have a link out to all registrants, and we'll see you in the next quarter. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye-bye.